So last week, or maybe rather I should say, a little bit over a week ago, I do realize that the scheduling of the podcast has become a little bit sporadic lately, and that's just kind of the way that my schedule has been. But regardless, so one of the last things that we talked about was that extremely infuriating and unfortunate situation with Ethan Bear and the Edmonton Oilers, where they got swept out of the Stanley Cup playoffs by the Winnipeg Jets. And a lot of, let's just say, some of the less savory fans decided that Ethan Bear was the one to blame for it, and they came after him and they said apparently he received a little bit of racialized abuse directed to him by social media. So I was talking about this a little bit last week, and I have to say that I was surprised by some of the responses that I got, on some of the Edmonton Oilers fan pages on Facebook where I like to share these podcasts. And really, as I had kind of expected, as I had anticipated, a lot of the response to it was pretty, when you're talking about a subject like this, I realize that maybe the phrase positive response is a little bit loaded. And what I mean by a positive response when I say that is that there were a lot of people that were interested in talking about this topic, had great and constructive things to say. And like everybody else, most everybody else, they didn't really appreciate, the kind of abuse that Ethan Bear received. And quite frankly, I think that if you are an actual fan of this team, then you didn't appreciate it either. But there were a few people that, did have to say their piece. And, what a lot of people came out and said was that they just said, it's like, oh, well, it's not racist to criticize a player for his on-ice performance. And to that end, actually, I do agree. Hey, don't get me wrong. There was a lot of stuff to criticize about Ethan Bear's on-ice performance, at various points of this past season. I think that he struggled with his confidence quite a bit. That's really unfortunate because, I think that most Oilers fans do like Ethan Bear an awful lot. And he did do the things that were necessary to set himself up for a successful season this year. He showed up as he normally does. One thing that Ethan Bear does do at training camp is he shows up in fantastic condition. Same thing this year. He showed up as probably one of the most fit-to-play players on the team. There were a lot of things that didn't really go his way, and as a younger player, that'll affect players in a particular way. Confidence is an asset in any kind of sport, especially professional sports. Ethan Bear did have his challenged a little bit this season, and I do hope that he's getting the assistance that he needs to work past it. Former UFC champion Chael Sonnen, of all people, Uncle Chael, there's actually a fantastic little bit that you can probably find somewhere about him talking, during his season of The Ultimate Fighter, and he's sitting all these fighters down, and he's telling them that, there was a point in his career where he had hit a ceiling, and he was having difficulty working past it. And it was a difficult thing for him to admit that he did need to get some help to work past it. But there is no shame in getting that kind of help. And so if there's no shame for getting that kind of help for a cage fighter, then there is no shame for seeking that kind of help for a professional hockey player. And I do hope that Ethan Bear, I hope that he is getting that help if he needs it. And now, on to the next little bit of this. Because saying that, Ethan Bear, let's just say, underperformed this season is one thing. That's a fair criticism. I think it does stand up when you take a look at pretty much the entirety of his season. Statistically, he wasn't as strong. You can probably pick out a number of little flashbulb plays, where it kind of stood out that he was really suffering. He was really, I shouldn't say suffering, I should say struggling. But what really disappointed me in particular was to see a lot of people come out and say, it's like, oh, well, he's a shitty player. It's like, oh, well, because he has one bad season, or because he has, portions of bad seasons within one season, suddenly he's a shitty player, and that's just is what he is. Is that the way that you think that he's always going to be? That's a terribly small-minded and short-sighted thing to say. to me, that kind of indicates that, these are not the kind of people that we would ever want to entrust making judgments about player development or coaching on the Edmonton Oilers, because that is somebody who obviously has a fixed mindset. They think that whatever you might say that a person is now, that is what they are, it's what they're always going to be, and there's no possibility there for growth or improvement. And that does not really speak well to the way that a lot of these people must, view themselves within the context of their lives. I am now what I'm going to always be, and I'm never going to get any better at it, and I'm never going to grow, I'm never going to improve, I'm never going to get better as a person. And some of these people, in my opinion, are people that could stand to become better as people. I don't want to unfairly disparage them, but I mean, if you as a fan of this team, if the only thing that you can think to do is bring anger and bitterness, into the discussion surrounding the team, it kind of makes me wonder exactly what you must be like in the rest of your life. Now, on the one hand, I think we do have to take a moment to try to be, somewhat fair and reasonable, and not unfairly disparage some people, to kind of admit that for a lot of players, growing into being a star NHL player is just not in the cards. There are a lot of players that get into a developmental system, and then they don't improve much, and then maybe their ceiling is the ECHL. Maybe their ceiling is the AHL. I mean, there's a lot of players that spend their careers there, for a reason. But personally, I'm entirely confident that Ethan Bear is not that kind of player who is going to such places to stay there. I am entirely confident that the very good season that he had in 2019 to 2020, I'm very confident that that wasn't just a fluke, that it wasn't a flash in the pan. Ethan Bear was a player that I got to see from time to time when he was coming up, through the WHL with the Seattle Thunderbirds. I did unfortunately have to endure the experience of watching his Seattle Thunderbirds eliminate the Regina Pats from Memorial Cup contention. And Ethan Bear was a very prominent part of that team. Whatever struggles Ethan Bear is going through now, they are not permanent. I'm convinced that I'm entirely confident that he will get past him, and he is going to become the player that we all thought that he was in 2019 and 2020. And I think that as an Oilers fan, there's two places where you could end up on that. You could be the kind of fan that bared with him through his struggles. Oh, you know what? I didn't intend that as a pun. But you could be the kind of fan that stuck with him through his struggles. And then when he gets back to being the kind of player that we all know that he can be, then you can honestly say that you were with him the whole time. Or, you can be that sad fan that scapegoated him, and wrote him off, and said that he, abandoned him basically at a time when he really could use fan support the most. I think that's a choice that pretty much every fan of the team either has already made or is going to make in the near future. And, I don't think that there's any shame in having stood by a player, even if he doesn't turn things around and get back to being the kind of player that Ethan Bear very well could be, and in my opinion will be. If you stand by a player like that and he doesn't get back there, I don't think there's any shame in that. But I do definitely think that there is shame in abandoning such a player, just because he struggled for a little bit. I know what kind of fan I'd like to be, and so then I think the question we all have to ask ourselves is, what kind of fan do you want to be?